Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is my twice weekly live podcast. It's show number 266. It's Wednesday, the 24th of August, and surprise, surprise, it's yet another dry day here in London. Mostly sunny, a few clouds around, and looking to be quite warm later in the afternoon too. So I've got quite a packed show for you again today. We'll be looking at the bike test statistics, which show that it's actually a record-breaking year. Although that does depend, of course, where you start your record counting. We'll look at the sales success for the Royal Enfield Meteor. Bikes from Eastbourne to Hertfordshire have gone missing in droves, but over in the Philippines, the deputy majority leader of their government has actually come out opposing some lane splitting legislation. Meanwhile, a total ban is proposed for bikes in Nigeria, while emissions tests are said to be planned to reduce two-wheeler pollution in Vietnam. We also have a quick look at an interesting electric bike as well, because it actually uses rivet-up frame, which actually makes quite a lot of sense when you think about it. A comment I made on the RoadSafetyGB site about the Surrey Hills 20 limit has gone missing. And finally, today's better biking point is all about what we can do about the collision when motorcycles are hit from behind, a particularly nasty one actually for the rider. So settle yourselves down for the next 30 minutes plus, and don't forget, if you have a comment, if you have a question, anything you want to ask, feedback on, I'm more than happy to answer those whenever I possibly can. I'll try to get to you during the show. If I can't during the show, I will at the end of it. So anything you want to say, do drop me a line. Always interested to hear what people have to say about the show. Right, okay, so crack on straight away with the news. Now, according to the Driving and Vehicle Standards Agency, Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, a record number of motorcyclists took the Module 2 motorcycle test in the 12 months from April 2021 to March 2022. The actual number was 67,511, and that was up 2,000 on the previous record set between those same months in 2012-2013, when pretty much when the Mod 1, Mod 2 test was actually introduced. So if you think that means there's a lot of motorcyclists getting qualified, of course you have to put that into perspective with the figures prior to the introduction of Mod 1, Mod 2, when the numbers would have been much higher. But why has the record for the current tests been beaten? Was probably not unconnected, of course, with the DVSA's drive to deliver more tests to cope with the COVID backlog. You'll recall that they were looking at getting more examiners actually out on the road testing candidates, but also improving the number of tests that they ran every week, and also working those examiners harder by making them do overtime. Anyway, the good news is, of course, that this throughput does mean that it's been work for the training schools, many of whom really struggled, of course, through the various lockdowns. And for the record, the pass rate was 48,583 candidates became for newly qualified riders. So that means 72% of bikers passed. And that compares with less than 50% of those taking the four-wheel test. Now, it's not quite clear if that's the first pass or the first test pass rate. I suspect it probably is. And it's actually been the case ever since I became a motorcycle trainer back in 1995. Motorcycle training has always done better than car training. Here's another statistic for you, though. BMW's perennial best seller, the R1250 1250 BMW GS, I'm struggling with my numbers at the moment, has been knocked off its perch as the best-selling bike here in the UK, at least if you look at sales between January and the end of July, those 7 months. Which bike toppled the mighty BMW? Well, it's actually the rather more modest Royal Enfield Meteor 350. Now, part of the unlikely success story that sees the rebirth of the Royal Enfield brand back in its original homeland. It's been the top-selling motorcycle over 125, and no less than 1,135 have found their way out to UK riders. Now, it's based, of course, on a brand new 350 single-cylinder platform, and the Meteor 350 was launched last year, and it was followed with the equally successful 650 twins. The Interceptor 650 was actually the best-selling over 125 bike last year in the whole of 2021, which is pretty damned remarkable, if you ask me. The Meteor itself there has now been joined in the model range by the Classic 350, and as announced in June on this show, a third version is about to be released, the Hunter 350. It was apparently publicly shown to the world in India earlier this week. But it could be that the very success of the relatively budget-priced Royal Enfield is actually an indication of how the current cost of living crisis is actually shrinking wallets. Whilst year-to-date sales are still up on COVID disrupted 2021, last month's overall figures, July that is, were down both on July's sales last year, but also year on year. Right, just got one comment to look at. It's Christine saying good morning. Hello, Christine. Nice to see you. Now, I know I've been on this topic many times already, but I can barely open the newsfeed without being hit by yet another motorcycle theft report. And I recently reported the effect of even simple anti-theft devices have on the risk of your motorcycle going walkabout. The improvement is about 30%, actually, 30% less chance of having your bike wheeled off. The news that 5 motorcycles were stolen in the Eastbourne area of Sussex in just 24 hours suggests something other than random theft. Now, the police said the reports came in between Thursday, August the 18th and Friday, August the 19th, and they came from the Langley area of the town. A Sussex police spokesperson said that only one victim's motorcycle has so far been recovered. Now, as well as the usual appeals for information and CCTV footage, there's also the usual advice to review security and storage to stop a bike being wheeled away. Now, personally, I'd be interested to know what motorcycles went missing, whether they are lightweights, which were left unsecured or very casually secured, and I'd like to know how the bikes were stolen. Now, 5 in one night does seem unusually high, and it does actually suggest perhaps there was a gang operating, maybe with a van to transport the unrecovered motorcycles elsewhere. Now, more move from the south coast to the north of London, and the figures are even more dramatic. 120 motorcycles have been stolen in Hertfordshire in the past 3 months. Police say here that a recent spate of thefts has been taking place in the Hertsmere, St Albans, Watford and Welwyn, Hatfield areas. Now, whilst the majority of those thefts are said to be the opportunist ones where the unsecured bikes and scooters are simply wheeled away, riders are being told to use designated parking areas with security hoops and CCTV if possible. Now, I wondered about that because I wonder how many of those facilities there are actually provided for by the local council. But this is the interesting bit. The spokesperson, Sergeant Karen Meller of Hertfordshire Constabulary, said, in many cases, the thieves are using cutting tools to steal secured bikes. So using strong, good quality locks will act as a deterrent. Now, this statement, plus further advice from Herts Police which urge the use of ground anchors to secure bikes and covers to hide them, all tends to suggest that there are significant numbers of machines being specifically targeted. And she also reported, incidentally, a number of attempted thefts while the bikes were being ridden. 2 useful pieces of information, which I hopefully have all ready for you in the comments here. Off-road bikes can be registered via their frame and engine numbers via the first of those 2 links. You can do that at the DVLA for free. And the second link there is Secured by Design website, which the police have approved as offering up to date and high standard advice on security products for 2-wheelers. So that's the second of the 2 links there. And Cheryl has looked in. Good morning, Cheryl. Good to see you. Right. Now, if it does seem sometimes that there's a raft of legislation in the UK aimed at making riding more difficult, at least we can still legally filter. Now, out in the Philippines, the Senate's Deputy Majority Leader, JV Ergesito, gave a thumbs down on Monday to some proposed laws that would have had significant impacts on riders. The first was actually a bill which would have banned lane splitting and penalising riders who attempted to do so. The second is a slightly weirder one because it would actually require motorcyclists to join an accredited club before registering their motorcycle or renewing a motorcycle license. Now, Jacinto said, rest assured the two bills, the anti-lane splitting and the mandatory membership in organisations from Congress, I will not support them and I'll make sure they don't pass in the Senate. And he said that the proposed anti-lane splitting legislation discriminates against motorcyclists who cannot afford to buy larger vehicles, which aren't subject to the same regulations, although frankly how that discriminates against motorcyclists, I'm not entirely sure, since you can't lane split in a car. Rather more logically, he said that mandating riders to join accredited clubs would transfer the responsibility for law enforcement from traffic enforcers to motorcycle clubs, which I frankly find an entirely bizarre proposition. And he also urged the government to replace the current mandatory installation of oversized front number plates on bikes with a new radio frequency identification scanner system. Instead of banning lane splitting, Jacinto actually encouraged the government to make lane splitting safe. Right, perhaps not entirely surprisingly, you'll find he's a motorcyclist himself. And so, continuing our travels around the world, we're off to Nigeria now, where the state of security across the nation is reported to have worsened as the activities of jihadist terrorist groups such as Boko Haram and the Islamic State actually continues. Now, the situation in the north is said to be particularly bad, with forced displacements resulting in a brewing humanitarian crisis. And as part of renewed efforts to address this insecurity, the federal government is seriously considering a total ban on the use of motorcycles across the entire country. Now, political experts in Nigeria believe that this would not only create considerable hardships for many people that it's supposed to protect, it's actually likely to be a complete failure. Now, one of the issues is the significant numbers of unlicensed commercial motorcycles, which are known as Okada, and they make a significant contribution to what is described as informal sectors of the society. And there are reckoned to be several million commercial motorcycle riders in the country for whom riding their motorcycle is actually their living. So taking away the motorcycle would not only make these people unemployed, but it would likely make them more vulnerable, more willing to join criminal groups as a means of survival. Now, analysts say that the only way the federal government could succeed in this proposed ban is to create opportunities for employment for those Nigerians who would be otherwise forced into unemployment. And they say, frankly, this is an option that seems highly unlikely in the unstable country. Now, another issue is that motorcycles are, of course, a really important means of transport. So word of attacks in remote areas have actually been spread by motorcycles. That allows the local populace on the one hand to get out of the way, but even the Nigerian army itself has a dedicated combat motorbike battalion because of the difficulty of access to remote areas. And where attacks have taken place, motorcycles are frequently used to convey victims to hospitals, which are often many kilometers from the communities. And finally, there's the usual question, who's going to enforce it anyway? Since the government forces are already tied down by the terrorists, it's hard to see how they could prevent criminal gangs from importing bikes illegally themselves. But meanwhile, in the capital, I've been reporting on this particular story for quite some time now. The state task force that is clamping down on Okada riders is continuing to operate. This picture was taken just a couple of days ago by the police forces in the capital, and it states that over 300 of these motorcycles have been seized. And it seems that they're being rather more proactive as well, not just grabbing people on the roadside. They're actually now starting to target the Okada riders who are riding in the areas where they are banned in Lagos. So very tough if you happen to be a motorcycle owner in Nigeria at the moment. Okay, don't forget, of course, that if you want to catch this show, it goes out Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. Very, very occasionally I have to do a recorded show or shift to the start time, and even more rarely I miss a show altogether. So generally speaking, set your alarm for 11 Sunday and Wednesday, and you'll catch me. Next show, of course, will be at the weekend again. Now, moving a little bit further around the world again, we're now in Vietnam, where the Hanoi Department of Natural Resources and Environment has actually proposed a roadmap for controlling motorcycle exhaust emissions. Now, as of July 2022, there were more than 7.6 million vehicles in Hanoi, and that figure is approximately 1 million automobiles and nearly 6.5 million motorcycles. So you can see why motorcycles here are so important from in terms of emissions. Now, next year we'll see the introduction of a legal framework for exhaust emission controls on powered two-wheelers, and there will be consideration given for zoning areas of air environment protection, which could mean limitations being placed on motorcycle access for particular areas. So what will happen is in 2024 and 2025, annual inspections will start on motorcycles that are more than 5 years old. And then from 2026, having dealt with some of the older bikes there, then bikes aged 3 to 5 years will also be brought into this regular exhaust inspection regime. Machines that fail the emission standards will be excluded from those zoned areas, and the aim of all this is to reduce carbon monoxide emissions by around a third and hydrocarbon emissions by around 40%. And the aim is to ease the budgetary burden on health services that deal with pollution related illnesses. And the government say they have a mandate for this because they say that in a recent survey of almost 4,000 local vehicle owners, presumably many of whom were motorcyclists, more than 85% said they supported controlling exhaust emissions from old motorcycles. Now, last show I talked about the UK-based e-bike manufacturer Mayving and how they had just received £1 million from the government in funding to actually grow their product from the very early stages of production up to a level where the company is capable of self-sustaining. And this shift from a production prototype to a production ready machine to actually building those machines and selling them is a problem facing every small startup. And it's no different for a US based startup called Ryvid and their Anthem E motorbike. Now let me just get that picture up on screen for you. Here we go. Let's have a look at that. There's the bike in question. Let me zoom in on it a little bit so you can see what it looks at. Now, we've seen enough of these bikes over the last 2 and a bit years on 11s to know pretty much what to expect. Now, styling wise, it actually reminds me very much of the Bimotor Mantra. If you go and Google that, you'll see what I mean. That headlight is very distinctive of the Bimotor. But of course, there is a 4.3 kilowatt hour battery pack hanging where the usual internal combustion engine would be. And even the fact that the battery pack is removable and equipped with wheels to help you move it around isn't so unusual or revolutionary these days as it was a couple of years ago. So with a relatively small battery, the bike is light. It's about 109 kilos, 240 odd pounds. The motor itself is actually mounted directly on the swing arm, just like most ICE scooters, but it's placed as close to the pivot point as possible, so it actually has minimal effect on the bike's on the unsprung weight of the motorcycle. And the aluminium swing arm also acts as a heat sink to cool the motor. Now, the motor itself drives the rear wheel via a belt, and that's actually enclosed inside the swing arm itself. And I guess that's made possible by the low maintenance nature of a belt, although quite how you replace it, I'm not entirely sure. But the BMW's first electric scooter, the C Evolution, actually used a similar design. So, okay, what about the performance of the motorcycle? Well, 18 horsepower peak. It's got a top speed of about 75, although how far it will go at highway speeds is probably open to some question. Ryvid Tran, who's the founder and the CEO of Ryvid, said the Anthem's actually capable of travelling 50 miles at 65 mph and considerably further than that at lower urban speed. However, knowing how much energy you get out of one of those batteries, even allowing for claims that the bike is more efficient, it does seem a little bit unlikely. Now, one other piece of design which I think frankly sounds very questionable is a wiring system that doesn't actually have wires. The electrics are actually connected via a flat printed circuit board into which all the electrics themselves plug at the right place where they need to. Now, Tran says that design is more durable. Frankly, I'm not convinced. Certainly, having seen the effects of corrosion on copper and soldered links, thanks to salty water in the UK, I'm certainly not entirely happy with that. But what did strike me as a really rather clever idea is the way that the frame is put together. There's the frame, and you'll see that it's not actually welded. It's not even pressed up. But what it does use is a lot of stainless steel plate, which has been laser cut and then riveted together. Now, it actually reminds me very much of the Hagen frame, which was designed to bolt together and to encompass a racing 500cc Honda engine built for clubman racing in the UK, and very successful it actually was. Now, right now, the Anthem is actually still a prototype. Now, production is scheduled to start in October this year with a pilot build of 20 units, and Ryvid is still raising money to switch to full-scale production, which they hope will take place from the end of the year. But Tran points out that the motorcycle was designed around the limitations of a startup motorcycle company and is specifically aimed at minimizing tooling costs so that only the dies for the swing arm and various plastic pieces actually require substantial expense. So that's actually a really, really rather clever idea. And frankly, I think that rivet up construction should considerably raise the chances of the $7,800 Anthem appearing for sale for US customers sometime fairly soon. Word about coming to the UK, I don't know, but the modular design there, apart from offering cost savings initially, it also strikes me that it would be possible to make some reconfigurations for different markets. So the frame, for example, could be adapted to genuinely seat two people and carry some proper luggage. If I just flip back to the picture there, you'll see it's got a kind of it has got a dual seat, but it's not exactly a touring bike, is it? But it could be reconfigured, I would guess, to do something along those lines. Now, you could also reconfigure the rear end of the machine to be a load carrying bike, something that we've seen other electric bikes working with. Now, since the swing arm and the steering head are also bolt-on and can be easily substituted for different designs, that could even pave the way for different bikes with different steering and chassis geometry. So you could, in theory, turn that into an off-road bike as well. And with the construction being so simple, there is always the possibility that the bike could be shipped abroad kind of as a flat pack and constructed locally. So I think that's a very clever reimagining of a fairly standard motorcycle frame. Right, okay, so Kevin's looked in and said good morning. Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy these shows, you are more than welcome to pop over to my coffee page there, where you can support me with a cuppa. That keeps the shows coming, and of course it also gains you access to lots and lots and lots about 800, I think, at the moment, of articles on better biking. All the posts from 2012 to 2019 are up, and I'm just finishing off 2020. 2021 is already up, and 2022 is going up as I write them. So do pop over to Coffee, find out what's over there, and if you like the look of it, drop me a cuppa, and I'll be most grateful, and you'll be learning lots more about motorcycling, I say, hopefully. Right, okay, so now, you may remember a story just recently where I talked about the 20-mile-per-hour limit on rural roads in the Surrey Hills area of outstanding natural beauty. And what I looked for was evidence to support the council's claim that they were looking to improve the safety of the rural roads and to ensure that the most appropriate speed limit is applied to each. Now, I looked at the evidence for their claims, and basically I was far from convinced, because the UK crash map data actually shows that most rural road collisions actually happen in the towns and on the main roads which crisscross the area, and not on the little lanes, which is where the measure is actually targeted. Now, the plan was actually covered on the RoadSafetyGB website, but there was no debate as to its merits. It was just basically a news report. And surprisingly, there were actually very few comments, or those that there were actually negative, which didn't surprise me. But I did actually pop up my own sort of very brief analysis of the data, and pointed them at the crash map, which said it's not the tiny lanes where the crashes actually happen. So I got that. As usual, it goes up and it's reviewed by a moderator, and I got a mail to say it was under review and I would be informed if it was rejected. Well, 10 days later, post still not up, and neither have I been told it's been rejected. So I must admit, I do wonder why that might be, what I contravened, and why I'm not being told what the problem is. Right, okay, so on to today's last item, and that is the better biking discussion. And we're working our way through the top 10 car or top 10 bike crashes, I should say. And this one is all about cars hitting motorcycles from behind. So imagine the scene. You're planning to stop at a red light, maybe at a giveaway junction or a pedestrian crossing, maybe even, as we've done a couple of times when out training, to let a family of baby ducks cross the road, and suddenly you hear that telltale screech of tyres that warns you that the driver behind isn't about to stop anytime soon. Now, if we're lucky, it's a mild tap. We're off to buy a replacement number plate. That happened to me years ago, dispatch riding, when I stopped at a red light at Bank, and the car behind thought I was going to carry straight on and was a bit surprised. A bit harder, and our fender bender can not just damage the number plate, but may actually push us over. Now, that actually happened to me in Luxembourg years ago. I was actually hit by a French driver, and in turn was pushed into the rear of a Luxembourg driver. In between the two, I lost my balance and dropped the bike. Fortunately, not with much damage, but it was a bit of a complicated insurance claim. Now, at worst, we may, of course, not be around to worry about the paperwork. Rear end shunts do kill. A friend of mine was actually very, very lucky not to be even more seriously injured than he was after he stopped for a pedestrian at the pedestrian crossing, and the car behind apparently didn't brake at all and shot the bike out from underneath him. He actually bounced clean over the top of the car. Bike was a write-off, of course. Pedestrian sort of watched all this in horror. And he was quite badly injured with back injuries. So it really is important that whenever we are slowing down or coming to a stop, that we watch the mirrors. And what I really want to emphasize here is not just take rear observation, as it says in the highway code and the basic training guide to bikers, and even in things like motorcycle roadcraft. We actually need to change the point of focus from ahead of us to behind us, and I'm going to try to explain why. So the first thing I want to say is, why are we slowing down? Well, the answer is, of course, because we are making a maneuver ourselves, or there is a threat ahead of us. So By slowing down, of course, what we are doing is we are removing the risks posed by whatever is ahead, whether it is us attempting to make a turn off the main road, or we are slowing because there is another hazard ahead of us. We're moving the threat from in front of us by losing speed to behind us. And that means two things. We must start rear observation good and early. And we can best do that by looking a long way ahead and having plenty of time to start those observations. And we also absolutely require a good following distance, because it's only when we know we're not about to run straight into the back of the vehicle in front that we really have the freedom to look in the mirrors and scan the scene behind us. If we're compromising our following distance, perhaps we've closed up on the vehicle ahead to make it easier to overtake, for example, we are really going to struggle to gain time to make good rearward observations. The moment I hear somebody say, I don't want to make a shoulder check, for example, when I'm about to overtake a vehicle because I don't want to take my eyes off the road ahead, that tells me they are too close to the vehicle ahead when they start planning that overtake. Drop back, give yourself a bit more time. Now, some people will say that you should know this already, and that the answer is regular checks and mirror history. But the problem there is that mirror history only gives us snapshots of what's happening. It doesn't play back a video, so we can't see the whole situation. We have to interpret what we're seeing in those snapshots, and that's easy to misunderstand. It's also easy to miss things. If something isn't in the snapshot, when we take that snapshot, we'll assume there's nothing there, but everything is possible. You know, if there's another vehicle blocking our view of a vehicle behind that, we simply won't know it's there. So the problem is that we can miss things with regular mirror checks, and the situation can change very quickly indeed. So I advise people to make very specific checks before we start to decelerate, so that we brake only when we already know what it is we're looking for, so that we can actually watch those mirrors. And I make that again, that point, we are watching the mirrors, not just checking them, and we can monitor the position of any vehicles that are following us and see if what they are doing. Only by checking and rechecking frequently do we get that information. The occasional mirror check is not enough. Certainly, mirror signal maneuver is completely inadequate. So we should think about how we're going to slow down too. Now, obviously, riding erratically with sort of speeding up and slowing down at odd intervals is definitely not a good idea, because that will confuse people behind us. But one of the things I would say is smooth changes of speed are easier for other riders, other drivers around us to see and then react to. Likewise, we don't want to leave everything to the last moment, or the driver behind will probably brake even later than we're braking. So slowing in plenty of time is really very important. And for preference, I'm going to be using the brake, so the brake lights comes on. Now, rolling off the throttle is fine if there is no one behind us, but I really would emphasize it's not wise when we're decelerating from speed or in traffic, especially if there is a car on our tail. So riders relying on heavy engine braking, and you know who you are, will discover sooner or later that they have caught out a driver behind them who hasn't spotted that the motorcycle ahead of them is decelerating for a couple of seconds. So use the brakes, get that brake light on, and if necessary, even reinforce the brake light. If visibility is poor, for instance, it's rain or fog, or even driving into low and dazzling sun, don't be afraid to use slowing down arm signal. We can still use the rear brake to lose speed. And if we've got that good distance between us and the vehicle in front, then there's no problem about slowing down using only the rear brake. So what if the vehicle behind that we are now monitoring shows no sign of stopping? What is our exit plan? Where is our escape route? Now, take a look at the photo here. It's a bit fuzzy. There's a good reason for that. I actually took this with a very early version of my digital camera. It was when I was taking some photos actually for a sort of a CBT, which I wanted to use when I was a CBT instructor. Now, at the time, the DSA guidance for turning right was to keep right over by the white line, which is where you can see that I'm positioned. Now, as I slowed for this right turn, the car behind reacted very late. You can see the dive on the car, you can see the brake lights are on, and it didn't actually manage to stop. It actually had to swerve through that narrow gap between me, the stones on the curb there, and what you can also see a lamppost in front, not a lamppost, a telegraph pole in front as well. So that was a pretty close thing. I'm not sure why I didn't do what I'd previously done at that particular junction, which is watch the mirrors, spot the problem, and just nail the throttle and accelerate clear. I think I was very conscious in doing the sort of the right maneuvers for the camera behind that was being held behind me. Anyway, now over in Luxembourg, if I'd been a little bit more on the ball, I could have swerved up the outside of the vehicle that was stopping ahead of me, and that would have got me away from any impact. What we don't really want to do, if we can possibly avoid it, is stop or slow and wait to be hit. Now, I was actually listening to a fellow CBT instructor who told CBT trainees that when stopping at junctions, keeping a foot on the rear brake will stop the bike being pushed forward if you're hit from behind. I can tell you categorically from my experience in Luxembourg, plus just a simple bit of physics regarding the mass of the bike, the downward force on the skinny rear tyre, and the resulting grip available to you as a rider, that the motorcycle's rear brake will not, under any circumstances, slow down a couple of tons of car, even if the car is rolling at just a few miles per hour. The bike will be pushed forward. I've no idea where that myth came from, but it is total nonsense. Now, the fact is that even when stopped, the danger is not over. We're incredibly vulnerable in positions like this, so we need to think about where we could move in an emergency. And that's actually the step I kind of forgot in Luxembourg, because I wasn't expecting the car in front to come to a halt. We actually had priority at the junction where she stopped inadvertently. Now, so it's important to engage the brain before disengaging your gears. Now, trainees, new riders, also I've heard advanced instructors telling riders to do it. They're taught to shift to neutral when stopped. But if we do, we have no way of moving again, not immediately anyway. But if we stay in gear, and if a vehicle appears and doesn't seem to be stopping, we do have the ability to let the clutch out, twist the throttle, and go again. We can potentially make a getaway, but once we're in neutral, we've no chance of moving instantly. We have to get the bike back into gear again, and that leads me to my next point. Are we stopped somewhere a vehicle might not be expected to be stationary? Can we be seen? Do we have an escape route again? If we're visible, a hand or foot on the brake means the brake lights on. We can even flash it to help a driver notice that we are slowing or even stopped. But there are places, of course, where cues form where we are in a blind area. Something that happened to me not too long ago, vehicle stopped to turn right into a driveway just out of sight round a blind bend on a 60-mile-per-hour road. Now, if the driver is going to come round the corner behind me at 60, is he going to be expecting to see a stopped motorcycle in the road in front of him? Well, the answer to that, of course, is no. So what I would do in those circumstances is aim to come to a halt where I can be seen from behind, and where I can move forward if necessary to use some kind of escape route if a vehicle does come up fast from behind. Particularly tricky, I think, because they're not regular features of the road, temporary roadworks, where you find traffic lights. They're very often put just around blind bends, and they are a particular risk, I would say, because drivers simply don't expect them. They weren't there yesterday, they won't be there the day after, and nobody expects them today. So it doesn't matter really how many signs go up. Drivers very often don't anticipate that the lights will be just out of sight round the bend. So I always try to avoid stopping just out of sight around that turn. A slightly more unusual one was some temporary roadworks that appeared on one of my training courses. on one of my routes. It was just over the set, or just over the crest of a railway bridge. Now, the railway bridge was quite steep, so it blocked off quite the road quite neatly on the far side, and the people who put the roadworks up had put the roadwork signs up some distance away from the bridge on the on the far side, but they'd also put the traffic signal up right at the bottom of the bridge where you couldn't see it. So there was just about room to hide a couple of cars and a motorcycle on the far side of it. Result, nobody expected to find stationary vehicles at a red light, and for weeks the road surface there was regularly littered with bits of broken glass and car body. Now, the problem is that the first driver had just stopped at the red light without thinking about the danger from behind, and the second driver hadn't anticipated the stationary traffic out of sight, even though there were roadwork signs. So my technique here with the trainees, because the trainees would inevitably disappear over the top and stop at the red light, was actually to come to a halt on the crest of the bridge where I could be seen, put the hazards on, squeeze the rear brake, and then hopefully it would be pretty obvious to a driver behind that there was a bit of a problem ahead. So what though if we go around a corner and we discover a queue too late to have stopped where we can be seen? Well, look for the other options. My first choice, if I can do it, is filter to the front of the queue. I want to get away from the back, let somebody else take the hit. Sounds a bit cruel, but why should I put myself at risk? I'm the more vulnerable road user. Secondly, if I can't filter, get right over to the left is my next option. Usually a driver seeing a queue in front will swerve right, or possibly swerve straight into the back of the queue. The only exception there would be really if the queue was around a right-hand bend. I'd have to be a little bit careful there. I even consider jumping off the bike as a last resort into a hedge. That's not a joke. I actually had to do that riding a bicycle once. So, okay, now you know why I try to stop clear of the back of a queue if I possibly can, because I don't want to be forced to take those options. And finally, only when there are at least a couple of vehicles fully stationary behind me to act as a shield do I bother to come out of gear. Now, am I overcautious to keep the bike in gear and keep monitoring mirrors behind me? Well, some years ago, when I was still a courier, it was a nasty, grey, miserable winter day, and I stopped at a red light on a 50-mile-per-hour dual carriageway. The HGV driver behind me, for some reason, reacted late, and he started to jackknife on the wet surface. That tells you how long ago it was. Now, I was in gear. I was watching the mirrors because I knew the HGV was behind me, and as soon as I saw this vehicle start to slide, I just let the clutch out, opened the throttle, and I moved forward, and I got the bike tucked out of sight on the left behind the curb. Basically, I got out of the middle of the road. It meant I had to go through the red light, but hey ho. The truck actually stopped about 10 meters over the stop line. Now, ask yourself, how hard would that vehicle have hit me had I still been in the way? It's important that we take responsibility in these situations, again, to consider how we get out of the way. Right, okay. Sam says he was told that back brake stuff back on CBT. Well, Sam, forget it. It's absolute nonsense. I was hit from behind once on my little 125 by a 2CV. 2CV was barely moving, actually. What happened rather amusingly was that my rack rode up on the sloping bonnet of the 2CV, and it just rolled my bike forward on my front wheel. There's no way I was stopping the 2CV. The occupants were actually looking at the town centre in Maidstone and admiring the rather scenic Bishop's Palace. Anyway, that is it for today's show. Thank you very much again for tuning in. Next one goes out on Sunday at 11. And just a reminder, the live event, the riding systems, what they are and why we need them, is going out on Wednesday, the 7th of September. The time is 2000 hours, which is 8 p.m. and tickets are a £5. You can buy a ticket from my live online event booking system, which is here. So don't forget, it's just a couple of weeks away now. So do pop over there, get yourself a ticket, and you'll find out all about how to use riding systems and why they're useful, but how they can also lead us into overconfidence if we use them incorrectly. So that's it for today. Quite a long show again. Thank you very much for looking in. And if you are taking advantage of the sun out there, it's looking quite pleasant indeed. Do try to make sure you stay shiny side up.